The Premier is in Dubai this week, and here at home, MLAs are taking a break from debate in the legislature too. The fall sitting, preceded by that emergency sitting, is done. We know the government expects to bring in a lot less money than anticipated, but the need to spend it is growing as the government sends patients out of province for important medical procedures. For more on all of it, we've reached our political panel. Adam Hunter covers politics for CBC Saskatchewan, and Murray Mandryk writes a political column in the Regina Leader Post, and then they join us Fridays at this time. Hi, guys.
Good morning.
So, Adam, it sounded like it ended a little bit testily, according to our news.
This has been kind of a pattern over the last, usually when the things, and you know this, when the end of the session or the sitting happens.
It's like kids in June, right? Just bursting to get out of class.
And sometimes the last couple of days can be like, everyone's kind of like, oh, you know what, we had our arguments, we had our differences, things that wasn't the case yesterday. There was, heated back and forth, accusations, name calling, calls for apologies from the speaker. And it got ugly, and afterward, it resulted in Mira Conway being asked to apologize. She didn't, and she had to leave and was escorted out. Jeremy Harrison was asked to apologize. He did, so he got to stay. And then afterwards, there was, a pretty, I'd say, interesting back and forth with Minister Harrison about his characterization of the protest a few weeks ago, where he was describing them as rioters. And we pointed out, well, there was no violence, no damage to property, no arrests. How can you call it a riot? Well, I saw a riot. And, during that, the emptying of the assembly, the reporters and the people that were leaving were in the same area. And the politicians, specifically the government politicians, were in a corridor where Jeremy Harrison had said that, well, we were secured and we were locked in that place. And it came out through this committee meeting that they were locked in by themselves, that it wasn't security that did that, because the NDP said, hey, wait a second, we weren't locked in anywhere. So that sort of back and forth, Mayor Conway said Jeremy Harrison lied about this, and that was one of her accusations, that he was, and of course, she didn't say lie in the House, but she insinuated that he was stretching the facts or bending the facts, and that's not allowed in the House. So that's kind of what happened, but it was a culmination, as you say, and a pretty heated finish to what started as also a pretty intense debate over parental rights. And so it's kind of this bookend where we started early. That was very controversial. That was very intense, emotional, yes. And now that's kind of how it ended. And it's bookended with this other issue and with this protest that happened a few weeks ago. And so there won't be an investigation ultimately. That was the conclusion. That's why that was discussed. The government called for an investigation initially, went to committee. Then the government members voted against having an investigation. So there won't be an investigation into the protest.
What about the new rules and such, that people can't just wander in to watch proceedings anymore? You need 72 hours.
You have to be locked up in your.
Those have been they've lifted those rules right after.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you make of this?
Of the rules or the session?
No, of Jeremy Harrison saying this was a riot.
Well, I don't want to be too unkind, but worst, most childish, petulant, unprofessional performance I can remember in recent time. Don't know how else to describe it. It's his conduct in the rotunda is not acceptable. His conduct in the House is not acceptable. Scott Moe is the one accepting that, and I can only think he's accepting that for the political benefit they have of driving in a wedge issue, of which he's good at. He stood up and called a lawyer, a fellow MLA, an anti-Semite, based on nothing. She didn't do anything. She didn't stand up in the House, as did Jennifer Bowes. And I'm talking about Mayor Conway, who was kicked out and had to eventually basically was asked to apologize for basically saying, no, I'm not an anti-Semite. After being accused of such, she did the honorable thing, I think, and basically called Jeremy Harrison out and said, look, you're being ridiculous. You're being a ridiculous, petulant child. And this is consistent with his behavior and how he tends to conduct himself over years of such. Yet it's not only tolerated, it's rewarded by the Premier, who, like most of the time he's not around at this time of year because he's off on some trip as government House leader come late. But he happened to be here while Scott Moe was off on a trip. And when Scott Moe is gone, the behavior gets even worse, as it did yesterday. And I sit back and look at it and say, no wonder people are so disillusioned with politics, and our legislature in general, when you have leaders like Jeremy Harrison should be acting as if he gets to set all the rules and is never allowed to question them. And that's the real big problem, I think, with the government all session. I think Adam alluded to it, and we talked a little bit about it off air about how this whole session was about father knows best. We will tell you which pronouns your kids are allowed to use, and we will, because parents know best and we know best. We will break the rules in terms of sending women out of province for mammograms because we didn't have enough foresight to basically think that we have a problem here and deal with the system. And we should get credit for doing this, even though it's costing 10 times more than it should. And how dare you question that we didn't over and over again. This was the theme of this session. And I can't imagine that that's not going to eventually hurt government. They're doing this for a deliberate wedge issue, and maybe it's working for now. Maybe people are buying into the notion that there was a riot going on that's completely fictitious, and Jeremy Harrison is making up big fat ones in the House and in the rotunda about what actually happened, which were just factually incorrect based on what security was writing in a letter saying, no, that this not happened. We did not lock you in the lounge. You chose to do that. No, the children were not threatened. And oh, by the way, if you were so damn worried about the children being threatened, why do you lock yourself in the lounge while the little kids were walking out? That's not what adults do. Adults take care of kids. And this is the problem. I think things like that are eventually going to catch up to this government at some point. But for now, I think sadly, in some ways, it's kind of working for them because it really secures the base. It really secures the narrative about about them taking a strong stance on issues as they are with the federal government. And to be quite frank, one of the untold stories this session was basically every time they seemed to be getting into hot water, along came the federal government saying and doing something stupid to bail them out. And that's a wedge political issue too. But you know what? It works to their advantage. It's just you have to be reasonable, decent, and smart. And I didn't see that from the government quite often. And I certainly didn't see that from Jeremy Harrison. He got to question leadership here.
We did see the federal government come along and give the Saskatchewan Party government more fodder this week, the latest with this cap-and-trade system, Adam. And, of course, the Premier can still access social media in Dubai, so he's been able to weigh in on that as Saskatchewan tells its story at COP28. What's the Premier been doing this week?
Yeah, we've got some pretty good access, actually, to the Premier, to be fair, and they've made opportunities for us to chat with him, and they've put out his schedule, and he's been posting, and everyone that's over there, a lot of the people that we talked to beforehand are posting on social media pretty active, showing the pavilion, what's going on there, meeting with different premiers, both current and former, in Canada. And so I think, we have a sense of what's happening there. And the government, they spent a lot of money to go there. So they are kind of backing it up by saying, hey, we're doing something here. This isn't just us signing an MOU or going to meet with some people. It's $750,000+ on the pavilion space, $240,000 on ads, not to mention all the travel costs. Of course, the mayor of Regina is there, the city manager. So there's a pretty big expense to go to Dubai. And this is all coming, as you say, in the backdrop of, as Marie alluded to, all sitting long. There were carbon tax stories that were happening, whether it was the heating oil exemption in the Maritimes, which forced Sask Energy and the government to go, okay, wait, we're going to exempt it from people's bills. We're going to give them the break on cost of living. Then we had the Clean Electricity Standards Tribunal from the Sask First Act get put into work. We have the oil and gas cap this week, the methane. So it's just over and over again. I thought it was a fire hose of information. Plus the government saying we're now going to spend money on carbon capture, spend some of this technology fund. We're going to put it into our SMR development. Mm-hmm. So all these things are happening. And as Murray was mentioning, there's just all this stuff also happening in the background. It's overwhelming at sometimes amount of things that were coming in. As Murray mentioned, a lot of it went back to the federal government and Scott Moe, that familiar foe of, hey, you're doing wrong by us. And now he's got a platform in Dubai where he's sharing the story of Saskatchewan, as you say, and all this stuff is happening while we're talking about more emissions caps and things like that are going to affect Saskatchewan.
Murray, the opposition's been on side with a lot of the Premier's points on that issue when it comes to carbon capture, even joining the government and making sure that, sanctions aren't brought to bear if we don't submit the tax, as the government says it will not. What do you make of that? Is that a good strategy for the NDP in this province to be on side on climate change and energy issues?
Well, politically, yeah, it absolutely is, although it's a painful strategy. The NDP have certain factions within them that may or not be active in the party right now that are to the left that are very much opposed to the environmental stance that Carla Beck is making, and sort of the practical reality that Saskatchewan makes its money from oil, gas, mining, agriculture, where we are big polluters. And Scott Moe is in Dubai right now selling the notion that while we might be big polluters, and while I don't really care if we're the most per capita GHGs, we do better than we likely could otherwise because of all the things that we do, and look at our strategies in terms of how we deal with this. And he's selling that notion. He's putting up videos from farmers mocking environmentalists at an environmental conference, which is kind of weird, but it sells here. Carla Beck knows that. The NDP strategists that know that in a way they didn't know it under Ryan Miley and before, who was into health issues, into social concern issues, that appeased and appealed a certain segment of the population, but a certain segment that got him 12 seats. If Carla Beck and the NDP have a hope of getting any more seats, it really has to be appealing that center core. They got to make a breakthrough in rural Saskatchewan. They got to do things. They're nowhere close to doing that right now. And the reason why is because, and this is the sad part, is what we saw from Jeremy Harris this week probably works. It vilifies, it divides, but it basically solidifies a lot of the seats, which happen to be rural seats that the Sask Party have, in which they feel comforted that there's a huge cabal out there between federal Liberals and federal New Democrats and provincial New Democrats who are radical. Listen to all the language they used, who are extremists. Listen to all the language they continue to use. They throw that ball into a big fat narrative, and they keep rolling it downhill. And I think you'll see even more of that in the coming year because it'll pick up steam going down to the next election. But it's worked for them. And unfortunately, what works for them in the short-term political cycle doesn't work well for a province that's growing, that's attracting more people of diverse background right now, and more city people and more people that are looking at the world from a different perspective. You want to know why you don't get doctors or nurses or other people from around the world coming here? Look at the way you behave in the legislature. Look how welcoming you are. For many people's strengths, not so much.
Thanks, you guys.
You're welcome.